By morning, the estate no longer felt like a mansion. It felt like a perimeter. Claire noticed it before she even opened her eyes fully. Footsteps outside her door at an hour when the staff corridors were usually quiet. Voices kept low but moving quickly. The muffled buzz of radios. A door opening somewhere farther down the hall, then shutting with purpose. Even the air seemed different, tighter somehow, as if the house itself had drawn in a breath and decided not to let it out. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory returned all at once. The ballroom. The man at the bar. Damien's office. Nolan Cross wants a meeting. Claire sat up too fast and had to steady herself with one hand against the mattress. She was no longer in her small room near the staff wing. Sometime after she had finally changed out of the red dress, and Helen had quietly brought her tea and a soft gray sleep shirt without asking a single question, she had been moved to one of the guest rooms closer to the center of the house, closer to Damien. The room was larger than anything Claire would have chosen for herself. Pale walls, a carved headboard, thick curtains half drawn against the watery morning light, fresh flowers on a side table, the kind of careful luxury that never called attention to itself because it assumed attention was already guaranteed. And outside the door unmistakably stood a guard. Claire swung her feet to the floor and crossed to the window. The grounds below were moving with quiet precision. 2 patrol vehicles that had not been there yesterday now sat along the outer drive. Men in dark coats were walking the east hedge line. Near the gatehouse, she counted at least 4 extra figures she did not recognize. Nolan had not even stepped onto the property, and already the entire rhythm of the house had bent around him. A knock sounded. Claire turned. Helen came the voice through the door. "May I come in?" "Yes." The head housekeeper entered carrying a tray with coffee fruit and toast, arranged so neatly it almost looked unreal. Helen had served the Moretti household for years, and her face usually carried the composed neutrality of a woman who had seen too much to be rattled by anything. This morning, though, there was something more careful in her expression. "Good morning," she said gently. Claire glanced toward the hallway behind her. "There is a guard outside my room." Helen set the tray down. "Yes, you say that like it is normal. In this house, normal changes quickly." Claire let out a small breath and looked back toward the window. "Am I in trouble?" Helen's eyes softened just a little. "No, dear. Trouble is outside the room. That is the point." Claire turned to face her fully. "What exactly am I supposed to do now?" Helen hesitated for the briefest moment. "What Mr. Moretti says." That answer did not surprise Claire. It still made something in her resist. Before she could say more, the guard outside shifted, and another voice followed. Miss Bennett, the guard, said through the door, "Mr. Moretti would like to see you in his office." Of course he would. Helen touched Claire's sleeve, once light and almost maternal. "Eat something first." "I cannot." "You should." Claire looked at the untouched tray, the polished silver, the neat triangles of toast, and suddenly wanted nothing more than a chipped mug in the old kitchen and 5 quiet minutes where no one knew her name. "I will later." Helen studied her, then nodded and stepped aside. Claire changed into the simplest thing she could find in the wardrobe Helen had apparently arranged for her overnight: dark slacks, a cream knit sweater, flat shoes. Something that felt like herself again. Or close enough to it. She tied her hair back loosely, then stopped halfway and let it fall instead. The knot now made her think of hiding, and she was not sure that was allowed anymore. When she opened the door, the guard standing there straightened at once. He was younger than the others she had seen downstairs, broad-shouldered, serious, clearly briefed. "This way, ma'am." Claire almost flinched at the word. No one in this house had ever called her that. They walked through the corridor together. The mansion's usual morning sounds were still present if she listened for them closely. Dishes somewhere below, a vacuum in one distant room, staff voices near the kitchen. But layered over all of it was the sharper current of security. Men she had never seen before stood near the cross hall and the rear staircase. A radio murmured from behind a half-closed door. At the landing above the main foyer, 2 guards watched the grounds through the front windows. Everyone knew something had shifted. Everyone knew it was because of her. The realization sat heavy in Claire's chest. When they reached Damien's office, the guard opened the door and stepped back. Damien stood near the windows with one hand in his pocket. Dark shirt sleeves rolled to his forearms. No jacket, no tie. Morning light cut across his face in pale winter stripes. Mason sat on the edge of the desk phone in one hand, a legal pad in the other. The atmosphere in the room was all tension and restraint. They both looked up when Clare entered. Damien's expression changed first, though only slightly. The hard calculation in it eased by a fraction when he saw she was steady on her feet. "Sit," he said. Clare did. Mason gave her a brief nod. "Morning." She returned it. "Morning." Damien came away from the window and braced one hand on the desk, leaning slightly forward. "We traced the message," he said. "Nolan wants to meet tonight." Claire's stomach dropped again, even though she had known this was coming. "Where?" "A closed club in River North." Mason glanced at his notes. He chose it because it reads like neutral ground. It is not. Clare looked from one man to the other. "And you are going?" It was not a question. "Yes," Damien said. The answer came so simply that it frightened her more than if he had tried to reassure her. She stared at him. "No." Mason looked up. Damien did not move. Clare heard the word she had just said and almost regretted it, but fear kept her upright. "You cannot just walk into wherever he tells you to go," she said. "That is exactly what he wants." Damien's gaze stayed fixed on hers. "He wants to test whether I will answer him. That part is already over. This is because of me." "No," he said, sharper now. "It is because he thinks he can put pressure on something under my protection and make me bend." Clare swallowed. "You keep saying that, because you keep trying to make this smaller than it is." His voice was low, not raised, but the force in it filled the room. Mason set the legal pad down and folded his arms. Nolan did not send a watcher to a wedding just to be theatrical. He wanted 3 things: confirmation, panic, and response. He got the first 2. Tonight he wants the third in person. Clare looked at Mason. "And you think meeting him is the smart move? I think refusing him would read like weakness." Mason shrugged once. "In our world, that becomes expensive." Our world. Clare lowered her gaze to her hands. That world had never been hers. Yet somehow she had become the reason it was turning. Damien came around the desk and stopped in front of her chair, not close enough to crowd her, close enough that she could not hide from the steadiness in him. "Tell me everything else you remember," he said. "No detail is too small." She nodded slowly and searched backward through years of fear. She told them about the make of the black sedan Nolan leaned on outside her apartment, about the silver signet ring he used to wear on his right hand, about a voice she had once heard over his shoulder at the cafe mentioning a shipment by the river, about a warehouse district she had passed through on a bus route after moving to her second apartment, where she later saw one of Nolan's men outside a fenced loading gate, about the way Nolan never repeated a threat. He implied once, then let the silence do the rest. Mason wrote quickly. Damien listened the way he did everything else, with full and terrifying attention. At one point, Clare hesitated over a memory that felt too small to matter. "There was a song," she said. Mason's pen paused. "A song." "Yes. The night I saw him in the alley. I remember music coming from somewhere nearby. Not from the street, from inside a building." She frowned. "It was old. Jazz, maybe. Brass. I do not know why I remember that." Damien and Mason exchanged a look that was too quick for anyone outside their world to read. Damien asked what building was near the alley. The cafe backed onto a service road. There was a club on the corner 1 block over. It stayed open late. Mason tapped the pen once against the page. "That gives us overlap with one of the addresses we already flagged from St. Louis." Clare looked at him. "You found that already?" "We started the moment you left the office last night," Damien said. Something about the sentence pressed strangely against her ribs, not just because of the speed, because of what it meant. He had taken her fear and turned it into action before she had even slept. Clare looked up at him. "Why are you doing all this for me?" Mason's eyes shifted away at once, as though even he knew better than to stay directly inside that question. Damien did not answer immediately. Instead, he crouched in front of her chair so that once again their eyes were level. The move was devastating in its quietness. "Because Nolan did not pick some random witness out of a city and leave her in the dark," he said. "He put his hand on someone inside my house." Clare held his gaze, breath uneven. "That matters to you because it is your house," she said softly. His expression did not change. "It matters because it is you." The room went still. Mason let out the smallest possible exhale and stood collecting the legal pad. "I should check the perimeter team," he said to no one in particular, and left the office with a tact that only made the silence he left behind feel larger. Clare stared at Damien after the door shut. For a moment, she was not sure she had heard him correctly. Or maybe she had heard him too correctly. He stood again and crossed toward the desk, putting space back into the room, as if he too understood the danger of having said something true too plainly. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "That is exactly what I was afraid of." Damien stopped with one hand resting on the edge of the desk. "What is?" "That I would become personal." He looked at her over his shoulder. "You already are." The words shook something loose inside her. Clare stood abruptly and moved away from the chair because sitting felt impossible now. She crossed toward the fireplace, then stopped there with her back half turned to him, trying to keep herself together. "You should not let someone like me become personal." Damien's reply came from behind her, steady and immediate. "Someone like you." Clare closed her eyes. Someone with this kind of mess attached. She heard his footsteps on the rug before she felt him beside her. When she turned, he was close enough that she had to tip her chin slightly to hold his gaze. "There is a difference," he said, "between a mess and a wound." Claire's throat tightened. He went on, voice lower now. "You did not create this." He did. She looked down, but Damien would not let the moment slip away. One hand came up under her chin, guiding her face back toward his. No more apologizing for surviving him. Her pulse jumped. There was no romance in the line, not in the ordinary sense. It was fiercer than that. More protective, more dangerous. Clare asked the only thing she could. "What if he does not stop?" Damien's expression darkened. "Then I stop him." The certainty in him should not have been comforting. It was anyway. He dropped his hand and stepped back before the closeness could become something neither of them was prepared to name. "From now on," he said, shifting back into command with visible effort, "you do not leave this section of the house without a guard. Not the kitchen, not the rear courtyard, not the staff wing. If you need anything, ask Helen or ask me." "Ask you." His mouth flattened slightly. "Yes." Clare almost laughed, but it came out as a shaky breath. "That sounds impractical." "I am not interested in practical." He returned to the desk and picked up his phone just as it buzzed. He answered with one word. "Report." Clare watched his face change as he listened. His jaw hardened. A beat later he said, "How bad?" Another pause. "Then is he alive?" Claire's stomach twisted. Damien ended the call and looked at her. "One of my men was hit outside a storage site in Cicero this morning." "Hit." Not killed then, but close enough that the word sat like metal in the air. Mason re-entered at once as if summoned by the change in tone alone. "What happened?" Bruno took a bullet grazing the shoulder when he went to inspect Site 4. 2 men in an unmarked sedan. Fast approach, no attempt to finish. They wanted a message delivered. Mason's expression turned flat and dangerous. "And the message?" Damien looked at Clare before he answered. "He knows we are moving." Mason swore under his breath. "That means one of the schedules leaked." The room sharpened instantly around that fact. Clare felt the shift before either man spoke it aloud. "There is someone inside," she said. Mason nodded once. "Maybe not in the house, maybe in the network. But yes, someone is feeding Nolan pieces." Damien's eyes had gone cold in that particular way Clare was beginning to understand. This was not anger in the loud sense. It was the kind that organized itself. "How many knew Bruno was heading to Site 4, he asked. 6, Mason said. 7 if you count dispatch. Cut the list to 3 until I say otherwise. Move all non-essential schedules off digital. Rotate gate teams every 4 hours instead of 8. Mason was already typing it into his phone. Done. Clare stood very still by the fireplace. A traitor. Not just outside pressure. Not just a rival man with old threats. Something inside Damien's world had cracked open too. She hated the guilt that followed at once. This would not be happening if not for me. Both men looked at her. Mason perhaps wisely said nothing. Damien crossed the room in 3 strides. "No," he said. "This is happening because Nolan sees opportunity, and because one of my own people is stupid enough to mistake access for safety. But the timing. The timing is his choice, not your fault." Clare looked at him helplessly. "You make it sound simple." His face tightened. "I make it sound accurate." For a second, neither of them moved. Then Damien exhaled, the tension shifting in his shoulders, just enough to reveal the strain beneath it. "Go upstairs for a while," he said more quietly. "Helen will bring lunch." Clare stared at him. "You want me to sit in a room while you prepare for a war?" "Yes." "I do not like that answer." "I did not ask whether you liked it." Something in her snapped at that. Fear, exhaustion, and the humiliating helplessness of the past 24 hours all rose at once. "Well, maybe I am tired of being moved around like a problem you have to manage." The words landed hard in the office. Mason went perfectly still. Damien did too, but for a different reason. Surprise flashed once through the control in his face, then vanished. Clare heard herself and could not stop. For 2 years all I have done is run or hide or keep quiet, so men with power could decide what my life was worth. First Nolan, now you. I know you are trying to protect me, but I am still the one being shut behind a door while everyone else gets to choose what happens. The silence that followed was so complete, Clare could hear the faint ticking of the brass clock on the bookshelf. Mason recognizing survival when he saw it backed toward the door. I will check the east gate. No one stopped him. When the office door shut again, Damien remained exactly where he was, eyes on Clare. Then to her surprise, his voice came back low rather than sharp. You are not a problem. Clare's breathing was still too fast. That is not what this feels like. He nodded once, as if granting the truth of her feeling without surrendering the argument. It feels like confinement because danger has already crossed the threshold. I understand that. He took a step closer. But do not mistake the way I am handling this for how I see you. Clare's hands had curled into fists at her sides. Then tell me how you see me. The question hung between them, reckless and too honest. Damien did not answer right away. That pause hurt more than a quick dismissal would have. When he finally spoke, the words came from somewhere deeper than command. I see someone who kept herself alive for 2 years with no protection, no backup, and no reason to trust men who promise safety. Clare felt the fight go out of her in one painful rush. He came closer. I see someone who walked into a room full of wolves and still kept her head up. Another step. And I see the one person in this house whose fear makes me angry at the world instead of at her. Clare looked at him, stunned by the rawness of that. His voice dropped lower. Do you understand what that means? She shook her head once. Damien's gaze held hers. It means this stopped being only about duty the second I realized the thought of him reaching you made me want to tear half the city apart. The room tilted. Clare could not breathe properly. He seemed to realize in the same instant how much he had revealed. The control came back over his features like a door closing, but not fast enough to hide what had already escaped. Clare whispered Damien. His eyes flicked to her mouth for one dangerous second and then back to her face. This is why I need you alive, he said. Not out there, not proving anything. Alive. Her chest ached. I do not know how to do this. Then let me do it for now. The words were almost gentle. Almost. Clare looked down at the floor, then up again. If something happens to you tonight because of me, I will never forgive myself. Damien's expression turned into something that was not quite a smile and not quite sadness either. People have been trying to destroy me for years, he said. I am still here. That is not an answer. It is the only one you are getting this afternoon. A knock cut through the room before she could say more. Mason stepped back inside all business again. Boss, we are ready when you are. Damien's posture changed at once. The man standing in front of Clare became the man the city feared. He reached for the jacket hanging over the back of the chair, shrugged into it, then turned to her once more. You stay here until I send for you. Clare took one step toward him without thinking. Be careful. The words were small, but they changed his face. For one brief, unguarded second, the hardness left his eyes. Then he closed the distance, took her hand, and lifted it to his mouth. The kiss he pressed to her knuckles was not playful, not courtly, not performed. It was a vow disguised as restraint. When he let her hand go, the warmth remained. I do not take stupid risks, he said quietly. Then he turned and left with Mason at his shoulder. The office door closed. Clare stood alone in the... They say a man like Damen Moretti never surprises anyone. In Chicago, people think they already know exactly how a crime boss moves. Power, money, beautiful women who understand the rules. But the night Damien chose a date for his brother's wedding, he didn't call a model. He didn't invite a senator's daughter. He walked into his own kitchen and pointed at the maid. The room went silent, because the truth is sometimes the most dangerous choices aren't made in boardrooms or back alleys. Sometimes they happen in ordinary places to ordinary people who never ask to be seen. Tonight's story isn't just about a wedding or a mafia boss or a girl in a red dress who didn't belong in his world. It's about the moment one decision changes 2 lives forever. So, before we begin, tell me where you're watching from tonight. And stay with me. This story starts quietly, but it doesn't stay that way for long. And that was the part nobody in that house could understand. Not Clare, not Mason, not even Damien's own blood. For the rest of that night, the mansion seemed to breathe differently. The halls were still polished to a shine. The chandeliers still glowed with the same soft gold light. The grandfather clock near the east staircase still marked each passing minute with perfect indifferent precision. But beneath all of it, something had shifted. The silence was no longer ordinary. It had weight now. It carried the kind of tension that moved ahead of powerful men and settled into every room before they entered it. Clare Bennett felt it all the way down to her bones. She closed the door to her small staff room and stood there with her back pressed against it, still in her plain black uniform, still gripping the old photograph she had taken from her locker. In the picture, she looked younger, lighter somehow, less careful. Her hair was shorter. Her smile was real, or close enough to real that it hurt to look at now. The skyline behind her belonged to St. Louis. The woman in that photo had not yet learned what it meant to be watched. Clare slid the picture back into the envelope she kept hidden inside a folded sweater in the bottom drawer and crossed to the narrow bed by the window. She sat down slowly, almost like the room itself might break if she moved too fast. Damen Moretti had chosen her. The sentence refused to make sense. He had not asked. He had not explained. He had stood in the kitchen with those cold, unreadable eyes and changed the direction of her life with one command. You're coming with me. Clare bent forward and pressed both hands to her face. This was impossible, humiliating, dangerous. In the stillness, her own thoughts began to crowd in. Maybe he had chosen her to make a point to his family. Maybe he was tired of women chasing his last name. Maybe he simply wanted to shock a room full of powerful people because he could. Men like Damen Moretti did not need reasons that made sense to other people. They moved and the world adjusted around them. But one detail would not leave her alone. When he said she would be under his protection, he had sounded almost angry, not performative, not amused, possessive in a way that made her uneasy because it had not felt romantic or playful. It had felt official, like a line had been drawn somewhere unseen. Clare lowered her hands and looked toward the dark window. The glass reflected only a pale outline of her face and the dim lamp beside the bed. Beyond it stretched the vast grounds of the Moretti estate, all stone paths and trimmed hedges and armed security moving like shadows under the night sky. She had worked in this house for 11 months, 3 weeks, and 6 days, long enough to know the rhythm of it, long enough to understand that Damen Moretti did not do anything impulsively. He was not the kind of man who made a choice and then figured it out later. If he had pointed at her, then in his mind that decision had already been made before he walked into that kitchen. That thought was somehow worse. Clare changed slowly for bed, though she knew sleep was going to be useless. She folded her uniform with the same neat care she used every night and set it on the chair in the corner. Then she lay down under the thin blanket and stared at the ceiling. Her mind kept replaying moments she had tried hard not to notice over the past year. The first time she had met Damen, she was carrying fresh linen down the West Hall and nearly collided with him outside his study. She remembered muttering an apology without looking up. Most people around him either flattered him or feared him loudly enough for him to feel it. Clare had simply moved aside and kept walking. Another time she had brought coffee into the library during a meeting and caught him watching her for half a second too long before returning his attention to the men seated at the table. Then there had been the night in early winter when the power flickered during a storm, and most of the house staff panicked because the security system was rebooting. Clare had found him in the hallway by candlelight jacket off phone pressed to his ear, voice calm while everyone else scrambled. He had glanced at her and said almost absently, "You're the only person in this house who doesn't look at me like I'm about to explode." She had not known what to say, so she said nothing. At the time, she thought he had forgotten the moment as soon as he walked away. Now she wasn't so sure. By the time the clock downstairs struck 3, Clare had given up on sleep entirely. She rolled onto her side, then onto her back again. Every time her eyes closed, she saw that kitchen. Damen in the doorway. Vivian's horrified face. Mason trying not to react. The look Damen gave her when she asked why her. "Because every other woman sees my name. You're the only one who sees the man carrying it." She shut her eyes harder. That was the problem with men like Damen. Even when they said something honest, it never felt safe. At 6 in the morning, the estate was already awake. Clare stood in front of the mirror in the staff bathroom, tying her hair into its usual neat knot, trying to build herself back into the person she had been yesterday. She wanted the routine of work. She wanted clean counters, folded towels, measured tasks. Things with edges. things she could control. But when she stepped into the rear hallway that led toward the kitchen, the atmosphere told her at once that routine had ended. 2 guards she did not recognize were stationed near the back entrance. One of the housemaids, Tessa, gave Clare a strange look and quickly dropped her eyes. In the kitchen, Helen, the head housekeeper, was speaking in a low voice with one of the cooks. She stopped the moment Clare walked in. Clare reached automatically for an apron hanging on the hook by the pantry. Helen cleared her throat. "Not today." Clare turned. "What do you mean, not today?" Helen gave her a look that tried and failed to be neutral. "Mr. Moretti gave specific instructions. You're to be ready by 7. Clare stared at her. Ready for what? Helen did not answer that. Instead, she stepped closer and lowered her voice. "Take my advice, dear. Don't ask too many questions in this house when the answer is already waiting for you." Clare glanced toward the wall clock. 6:22. Her stomach tightened. She forced herself to make tea she had no intention of drinking, if only to have something to do with her hands. But the cup remained untouched beside her when a black SUV rolled into view beyond the back windows exactly at 7. "Right on time?" Mason Reed stepped out. Even from inside the kitchen, his presence carried a different kind of authority than the guards. He was not loud. He did not need to be. He moved like a man who had long ago decided that hesitation belonged to other people. He entered through the service door and checked his watch. "You're late by 30 seconds, he said. Clare looked at the clock. It just turned 7. Mason held the door open. "Then let's not lose the lead." She grabbed her coat, suddenly aware of every pair of eyes in the kitchen following her. Outside, the morning air off Lake Michigan was cold enough to sting. Clare wrapped her coat tighter as she approached the SUV. The gravel beneath her shoes sounded too sharp in the silence. Mason opened the rear passenger door for her. She paused. "Where are we going?" "To fix the problem," he said. "What problem?" His gaze moved over her plain coat, simple slacks, worn shoes. "The fact that in 3 hours you're supposed to look like you belong next to Damen Moretti." Clare almost refused on instinct alone. This was absurd. It was already too much. And yet something in Mason's face stopped her. He did not look amused. He did not look cruel either. If anything, he looked resigned, like a man carrying out orders that would shake loose half the city before the day was over. Clare got in. The SUV pulled away from the staff entrance and down the long private drive lined with bare winter trees. The estate gates opened without slowing, and the city gradually replaced the quiet wealth of the North Shore with steel traffic and the low gray shine of morning over Chicago. For the first 15 minutes, neither of them spoke. Clare watched neighborhoods blur past the window. Coffee shops opening, delivery trucks unloading, runners in dark leggings moving along the sidewalks with headphones in, men in suits crossing streets with their collars turned up against the wind. The city looked normal in the way cities always did from behind glass, as if nothing dangerous could be happening only a few lanes over. Mason finally broke the silence. "You can still breathe, you know." Clare turned from the window. "I am breathing." Barely. She looked down at her hands. They were clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. Mason softened a fraction. "He's not doing this to humiliate you." Clare let out a quiet laugh with no humor in it. "That makes one of us." He did not answer immediately. Damien doesn't move unless he's sure. "That's supposed to help. It means if he chose you, he had a reason." Clare turned back to the window. "That's exactly what scares me." The SUV eventually pulled in front of a high rise of glass and stone near the Gold Coast. A doorman opened the outer door before Mason even reached it. Clearly, they were expected. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of white flowers and expensive candles. The floors were polished cream marble. The ceiling soared. Everything about it announced money so old and secure that it no longer needed to be displayed loudly. Clare looked down at her coat and shoes and felt her throat tighten. Mason guided her toward the elevators without comment. He pressed the top floor. In the mirrored walls of the elevator, Clare caught sight of herself standing beside him and had the absurd thought that she looked like someone who had gotten lost on the wrong set. When the doors opened, sunlight flooded the space beyond. The penthouse was vast and bright and impossibly still, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. Ivory couches sat in perfect angles around a glass table. Soft instrumental music played somewhere out of sight. Fresh peonies in a crystal vase stood on a console near the entrance. A woman in a tailored cream suit crossed the room toward them with the energy of someone who is always 5 minutes ahead of the world. "Clare Bennett," she said warmly. "At last." She held out a hand. Claire took it automatically. "I'm Elena Brooks." Her voice was smooth, confident, the kind that made people believe things before they had agreed to them. Elena's eyes swept over Claire once, not critically, but with quick professional precision. Then she smiled. "Oh yes," she murmured. He was right. Claire frowned. About what? Elena did not answer directly. "About the fact that none of this is the issue. The issue is that no one has bothered to show you to yourself in the correct light." Claire looked at Mason, hoping for an explanation. He only shrugged. "I'll be downstairs. Try not to fight them too hard." Fight who? But 2 assistants had already appeared from somewhere deeper in the penthouse, one carrying a tray of products, the other a garment bag covered in clear plastic. Claire took a half step back. "I don't think you understand. I'm not supposed to be here." Elena's expression gentled. "My dear, that sentence is usually spoken by women who have spent too long letting other people decide the size of their place in a room." Claire swallowed. "You don't know anything about me." "No," Elena said. "But I know a great deal about men like Damen Moretti. And men like him do not personally call me at 6 in the morning unless the woman in question matters." The room went very quiet. Claire felt something twist deep in her chest at the word matters. "It's not like that," she said too quickly. Elena gave her a look that suggested she had heard many women deny many things before. Perhaps not. Yet. Claire opened her mouth to protest again, but Elena touched her arm lightly and guided her toward a dressing room lined with mirrors. "Let us start with what we know. Tonight, every eye in that ballroom will land on you the second you enter. You can spend the evening apologizing for taking up space, or you can decide to let them look." Inside the dressing room stood a long vanity covered in brushes, palettes, bottles of serum, curling irons, and jewelry boxes. On the far side, hanging alone against a paneled wall, was the dress. Claire stopped walking. It was crimson, not bright in a cheap, loud way. It was richer than that, deeper, the kind of red that held both danger and elegance at once. The fabric flowed in one sleek line from the hanger, the skirt soft and heavy, the silhouette simple enough to be powerful. Her breath caught. "No," she said instantly. Elena folded her arms. "No, I can't wear that." "Why not?" Claire stared at the dress as if it might accuse her. "Because women like me don't wear dresses like that." Elena stepped beside her. "Women like what?" Claire had no answer that did not sound sadder spoken aloud than it felt inside her own mind. Elena's voice softened further. "This is not about pretending to be someone else. It's about letting the room meet the version of you that fear has been keeping hidden." Claire shook her head. "I don't need a room to meet me." "No," Elena said. But perhaps one man already did. That line landed with the unnerving precision of a blade. Before Claire could recover, Elena motioned toward the styling chair. "Sit." The process began there. Claire's hair was loosened from its usual severe knot and brushed out until it fell over her shoulders in dark, heavy waves she had forgotten were possible. A treatment was worked through the ends. Warm air, the scent of jasmine and heat, curling iron, pins, fingers moving with skilled gentleness. As the minutes passed, pieces of herself seemed to emerge one by one from the shape she had constructed to stay unnoticed. Elena talked while she worked, though never in a way that demanded Claire answer. She spoke about balance, texture line, softness. About how some women spent their whole lives being looked at and still were never truly seen. About how power in a room often had less to do with volume than stillness. When the makeup began, Claire felt almost embarrassed by the intimacy of it. The assistant dabbed warm light into the corners of her eyes, brushed color lightly over her cheeks, shaped her mouth into something softer, fuller, more alive. Nothing looked theatrical. That was the frightening part. It looked like herself. Only rested. Revealed. At one point, Elena caught her expression in the mirror. "You look as though you were watching a stranger walk toward you." "That's exactly what it feels like." Elena smiled. "Give her a chance." By the time the dress came down from the wall, Claire's pulse had become an unsteady thing. The assistants helped her step into it, carefully gathering the fabric, guiding it over her hips, smoothing it into place. The inside lining was cool against her skin. The fit was exact in the way only something very expensive could be exact. It hugged her waist, skimmed her body, and fell cleanly to the floor. The neckline was elegant, the back lower than anything Clare would have chosen for herself. When the zipper closed, she barely recognized the woman in the mirror. She stood there motionless. The red transformed her, but not in the childish way she expected. It did not make her look like she was pretending to be rich. It made her look impossible to dismiss. Elena came to stand behind her and met her gaze in the mirror. "There you are." Claire's throat tightened unexpectedly. "He picked this color." Elena nodded once. "Yes. Why?" But before Elena could answer, the dressing room door opened a crack, and Mason's voice floated in. "Elena, tell me she's almost ready, because I have about 10 minutes before he starts calling me every 3. He stepped in as he spoke, then stopped. For one rare second, he looked genuinely unprepared. His eyebrows lifted slightly. The corner of his mouth moved as if he had considered making a joke and abandoned it because it no longer fit the moment. Clare looked down, suddenly self-conscious. "It's too much, isn't it?" Mason cleared his throat. "No." He said it flatly, but the word carried weight. Elena lifted a brow. No, he repeated, eyes still on Clare. "For anyone else in that room, maybe. For walking beside Damien, it works." Clare did not know why that sent a strange little rush of heat through her chest. The last details came quickly after that. Simple earrings, no necklace. A pair of heels Elena insisted she would learn to survive. One ring on her right hand, delicate and understated. Perfume so subtle, Clare only noticed it when she moved. Then there was nothing left to adjust. Elena stepped back and looked at her one final time. "Remember something tonight? Confidence is not the same thing as comfort. You do not need to feel at ease to look like you belong." Clare let out a nervous breath. "I don't know how to do that." "You don't have to know. You only have to decide not to run." Those words stayed with her all the way down in the elevator. When the doors opened to the private garage level, the outside world felt sharper, colder. The hum of engines echoed in the polished concrete space. 2 black SUVs waited near the far wall, and beside the nearer one stood Damen Moretti. He wore a charcoal suit cut so precisely it looked as if it had been built on him, not for him. White shirt, dark tie, black coat open at the front, a silver watch at his wrist. His hair was pushed back, not overly styled, just controlled enough to make the few loose strands seem intentional. He was speaking quietly into his phone when they emerged, one hand in his pocket, the other holding the device against his ear. Then he looked up. The phone came down. He did not move. The entire garage seemed to hold its breath with Clare. For the first time since she had met him, his face gave something away before he could stop it. Not softness exactly, not surprise either. Recognition, maybe, as if the image standing in front of him matched something he had already seen in his mind. Clare felt the heat rise slowly up her throat. Mason walked ahead first, taking the garment bag Elena had carried with accessories, then deliberately stepping out of the line between them. It was such a small movement, but Clare understood it for what it was. He was removing himself from the scene. Damien ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket. "Turn around," he said. Clare stared at him for half a beat, then obeyed. The heels made her feel taller and less steady all at once. The skirt moved in a smooth whisper around her legs as she turned. She could feel his eyes on the line of her back, the fall of the fabric, the work Elena had done with her hair. When she faced him again, he stepped forward. Not fast, never fast. He reached up and tucked one loose piece of hair behind her ear. Fingers brushing the side of her face with a restraint that somehow felt more intimate than if he had touched her fully. "You look," he said, then stopped. It was the first time Clare had ever seen him search for a word. Finally, he said, "Perfect." The word hit harder than it should have. Not because it sounded flirtatious. It didn't. Because he said it like a conclusion. Clare swallowed. "I don't feel perfect." One corner of his mouth moved faintly. It was not quite a smile, but it was the closest she had seen. "I'd be more concerned if you did." Mason opened the SUV door. Damien offered Clare his hand, not as an order this time, as an invitation. She looked at it for a second, then placed her fingers in his. His grip was warm, controlled, and brief. He guided her into the car and slid in beside her. Mason took the front passenger seat and the convoy began to move out of the garage. The city stretched before them in silver and blue as they headed toward the hotel. For the first several blocks, Clare could hear nothing but the low engine, the soft hum of the heater, and the sound of her own pulse. Damien broke the silence first. "There are a few things you need to understand before we arrive." Clare turned slightly toward him. His profile was all clean lines and stillness as the city passed outside. People glanced at the SUV at stoplights and looked away quickly once they realized who might be inside. "You stay with me," he said, "at all times." She nodded. "You do not accept drinks from anyone but staff cleared by our people." Her hands tightened in her lap. "You do not go anywhere alone. Not the terrace, not the powder room, not the lobby. If you need something, you tell me." Claire looked at him. "You make it sound like we're going to war." He met her gaze then, and there was nothing light in his eyes. "In my world, Claire, there is never a clean line between a celebration and a threat." That sent a cold thread down her spine. She tried to steady herself with practicality. "Why did you really choose me?" Damien looked forward again, jaw set. "I already told you." "Not enough." Mason glanced at them in the rearview mirror, then politely shifted his attention back to the windshield. Damien exhaled slowly through his nose, as if deciding how much honesty the moment could bear. "Every woman who would have expected to stand beside me tonight wants something. Access, status, influence, leverage. And you think I want nothing? I know you don't." Claire gave a quiet, uneasy laugh. "You don't know me." "No," he said. "I know how you look at me." That silenced her. He continued, voice lower now. "You look at me like I am dangerous. You look at me like I should be handled carefully. You look at me like a man, not a ladder." The words landed one after another, each one exposing more than she thought he was capable of exposing. Claire turned to the window so he would not see how unsettled she felt. "And that made you decide to drag me into a ballroom full of people who hate me already without knowing me." "Most of them don't hate you," he said. "No, they hate uncertainty. You simply arrived wearing it." She almost smiled in spite of herself. A few blocks later, she found her hand smoothing over the red fabric at her thigh. "Why this color?" Damien looked down briefly at the dress, then back at her face. "Because red draws attention." "That seems cruel." His gaze sharpened. "No. It makes a statement before anyone has the chance to define you for themselves." Claire looked at him carefully. "And what statement is that?" His answer came quiet and immediate. "That if they look at you, they look at me beside you." The car seemed smaller after that. Claire could not tell whether the pounding in her chest came from fear or from the dangerous pull of being chosen so deliberately by a man who chose almost nothing out loud. The convoy slowed. Up ahead, the hotel rose in polished stone and glass above the avenue, all flags and light and valet lines and black sedans gleaming beneath the covered entrance. Security was already in position. Men in dark coats moved subtly but with purpose. Cameras flashed near the front steps where local press had gathered for arriving guests. Claire's mouth went dry. "Oh no." Damien followed her gaze toward the cameras. "Breathe. There are reporters." "Yes." "You didn't mention reporters." "I assumed that was implied by the kind of wedding this is." She looked at him in disbelief. "That is not how implied works." Mason made a sound that might have been the ghost of a laugh and quickly disguised it as a cough. The SUVs rolled to a stop. Outside, the noise swelled at once. Voices, flashes, doors opening, valets moving, people turning. The energy of expensive events and expensive people, all of it sharpened by the possibility of spectacle. Claire's heartbeat turned violent. "I can't do this." Damien turned fully toward her for the first time since they left the garage. "Yes, you can." "No." She shook her head. "You don't understand. This is not my world." His expression changed then just slightly. Something colder moved under the surface, but not at her. At the thought itself. "You think I chose you because I needed someone who belonged to that room?" Claire did not answer. Damien leaned in, not enough to crowd her, but enough that she had no choice except to meet his eyes. "I chose you because I was tired of every person in that world performing for me. Tonight they can look all they want. They can whisper. They can choke on their champagne. I do not care." His voice dropped lower. "But you will not shrink in front of them. Do you understand me?" Claire held his gaze, breath shallow. His hand moved, not touching her at first, then settling at the side of her waist with careful grounding pressure. "You walk in with me," he said. "No one touches you. No one corners you. No one gets to decide who you are in that room except you." For a second, something deep and painful shifted inside her. "No one gets to decide who you are." How long had it been since she had heard anything like that? She nodded once. Damien studied her face as if confirming the answer there, then withdrew his hand and stepped out of the SUV. The sound outside rushed in. Flashbulbs burst white against the gray afternoon. Men called his name. A woman with a microphone tried to push closer and was gently blocked by security. Damien stood beside the open door in that tailored suit and looked up at her from the curb. Then he offered his hand again. Clare took one breath, then another. Then she placed her hand in his and stepped out. Cold air touched her bare shoulders for one sharp instant before the heat of the entrance lights replaced it. The hem of the red dress brushed the pavement, then settled. She straightened, and the world around her changed. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. One cluster of women near the entrance stopped mid-sentence. A politician Clare had seen on television blinked openly. A photographer lowered his camera, then raised it again with renewed interest. The whispers began at once. "Who is that? Is that Damen Moretti? Who did he bring?" Clare heard none of them clearly because all her senses seemed fixed on one thing only: the hand at the small of her back. Damien's hand, steady, possessive only in the strictest, quietest sense, not claiming her for vanity, shielding her in plain sight. He guided her forward with measured confidence, never hurrying, never apologizing for her. That did more than any dramatic defense could have done. It told every person in view that her presence was intentional. At the top of the steps, a voice called out from somewhere behind the press line, "Mr. Moretti, is this your date for the evening?" Damien did not even look back. Yes. No hesitation, no dismissal, no embarrassment. Just yes. Clare felt that one word all the way through her. Inside the main lobby, the warmth hit first, then the music, then the glow. Marble floors reflected the chandelier light like pale water. White roses in towering arrangements framed the path toward the ballroom. Hotel staff in black moved with trained elegance around the arriving guests. Somewhere beyond the carved double doors ahead, a string quartet was playing something soft and formal. Clare could feel eyes on her from every direction, some curious, some amused, some sharp enough to cut. She resisted the instinct to pull away from Damien's side. He must have felt it because his fingers shifted slightly at her back. "Eyes up," he murmured. She lifted her chin. "Good," he said. A man in a navy tuxedo passed them with a younger woman on his arm and stared too long. Damien turned his head just enough to meet the man's gaze. That was all it took. The man immediately looked away. Clare swallowed. "Do they all fear you this much?" "They fear inconvenience," he said. "That isn't an answer. It's the only one they need." Near the entrance to the ballroom, an older woman in diamonds gave Clare a smile so polite it somehow carried insult inside it. Clare pretended not to notice. Damien noticed anyway. Without breaking stride, he said quietly, "You are doing better than half the room already." "How would you know?" "Because they care what everyone thinks. You still care what is true." Clare looked at him, then surprised by the strange sincerity in the remark. Before she could answer, the ballroom doors opened wider. A wash of golden light spilled across the marble. Inside waited a world built entirely out of elegant status and judgment, and with Damen Moretti's hand at her back and the red silk whispering around her legs, Clare Bennett crossed the threshold beside him as though she had every right to be there. The first thing Clare noticed inside the ballroom was not the music. It was the silence. Not complete silence. The quartet near the far wall still played beneath the low murmur of conversation. Crystal glasses still touched. Servers still moved with silver trays balanced in practiced hands. But there was a visible pause in the room, a break in rhythm that spread table by table as more guests realized who had just entered and who was standing beside her. Damien did not slow down. If anything, he became more deliberate. His hand remained at the small of Clare's back as he guided her between round tables draped in ivory linen and trimmed with white roses, candlelight, and polished gold. The ballroom glowed like a magazine spread built to flatter old money. Men in tailored tuxedos turned openly in their seats. Women in satin and diamonds watched over lifted champagne glasses with the kind of interest that never meant anything kind. Clare felt every eye on her skin. She kept her shoulders back because Damien had told her to. She kept her chin lifted because lowering it now would feel like surrender, but inside her pulse had gone wild. Fragments of whispers followed them. "Who is she?" "That is Damen Moretti. He brought her here. From the house, I think." "No, that cannot be right." Clare kept walking. The red silk moved around her legs in a quiet, dangerous whisper. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor, each step carrying her farther into a room that had never been built for women like her. Yet beside Damien, no one dared treat her like she had wandered in by mistake. At least not out loud. Near the front of the room, the groom finally spotted them. Julian Moretti broke away from a cluster of guests and started toward them with the grin of a man who enjoyed chaos almost as much as he enjoyed family. He was younger than Damien by several years and easier in his body, but there was still enough of the Moretti blood in his face to make the resemblance obvious. His tuxedo was immaculate, his bow tie perfect, and his expression the exact opposite of everyone else's careful restraint. He looked delighted. "Well," Julian said as he reached them, "I was wondering how long you were planning to keep the entire room waiting for the real entertainment." Damien's expression did not change, but Clare felt a subtle shift in the air between the brothers that suggested this was normal for them. "You're getting married," Damien said. "That should be enough entertainment for one night." Julian laughed and pulled him into a brief embrace. Then he stepped back and looked at Clare. For one split second, surprise flashed over his face. Not cruelty, not judgment, just honest surprise. Then his smile softened into something warmer. "You must be Clare." Clare blinked. "You know my name?" Julian lifted one shoulder. "I know everything that enters my brother's orbit unexpectedly." Damien gave him a cool look. Julian ignored it and held out his hand to Clare. She took it, grateful for the simple civility of the gesture. "You look incredible," he said. "And for the record, this is the most alive I've seen this room all evening." Clare almost smiled. "I'm not sure that's a compliment." "It is if you know these people." Before she could answer, a woman in a fitted ivory gown approached from Julian's side. Her dark hair was pinned in an elegant sweep at the nape of her neck, and her expression held none of the brittle curiosity Clare had already seen from half the ballroom. This had to be Sophia. Sophia Hale, now Sophia Moretti, in a matter of hours. She reached for Clare's hand with easy grace. "I'm glad you came," she said. The words were simple. The tone was not. There was genuine kindness in it, the kind Clare had not expected to find here. "Thank you," Clare said quietly. Sophia's gaze flicked briefly to Damien, then back to Clare, and whatever she noticed there remained locked behind a polite smile. "Anyone who makes my brother-in-law walk into a room looking that pleased deserves a seat near the dance floor." Julian made a sound of agreement. "I knew it. I knew he had a pulse. I just needed the right witness." Damien's jaw tightened by the smallest degree. "Careful." Julian raised both hands. "I'm the groom. I'm legally untouchable tonight." For the first time since stepping out of the SUV, Clare felt a tiny pocket of air open around her. Julian's warmth and Sophia's composure made the room seem slightly less hostile, if only for a minute. But the relief did not last. A woman in emerald silk approached from the right with a smile too polished to be trusted. She was striking in the way expensive women often were. Every detail precise. Blonde hair swept back. Diamonds at her throat. A confidence that had probably been mistaken for elegance most of her life. Vanessa Cole. Clare did not know her name yet, but she recognized the type instantly. Women like that had always looked through her, not at her. Vanessa stopped just inside Damien's personal space and gave him a smile designed to suggest history. "Damien," she said, "you certainly know how to shift attention." Her gaze moved to Clare and lingered just a beat too long on the red dress. "And your date is unexpected." Damien did not look at Vanessa. He looked at Clare for half a second instead, as if to make sure she was not rattled, then returned his attention to the room in general. "The word you're looking for is chosen." Vanessa's smile thinned. "That is one way to describe it." "It is the correct way," Damien said. The exchange was quiet, clean, nearly elegant, yet it landed with the force of a slap. Vanessa's eyes hardened before she remembered where she was and smoothed her expression back into social grace. "Of course. Well, I do hope she enjoys herself." "Hope she—" Clare had not meant to speak. The words slipped out before caution could catch them. "I plan to." Vanessa's eyes flicked back to Clare in open surprise. Sophia hid a smile behind her champagne glass. Julian looked like he was enjoying the scene far too much. Vanessa recovered quickly, but the damage was done. She offered a cool nod and drifted away toward another cluster of guests, no doubt carrying a fresh version of the story with her. Julian let out a low breath. "I like her." Damien's hand pressed lightly against Clare's back again, guiding her forward. "That makes one of us." They moved deeper into the ballroom as the ceremony time approached. Guests began filtering toward their assigned tables, though plenty still found reasons to hover nearby. Clare could feel the room trying to solve her, to place her, to identify whether she was a scandal, a mistake, or something more dangerous. A server offered champagne. Damien took one flute for himself and another for Clare, only after giving the man a brief look that was clearly some kind of silent confirmation. Clare accepted the glass with fingers that still felt unsteady. "You screen the waitstaff too," she murmured. "I screen everything. That sounds exhausting. For other people," he said. They stopped near a column wrapped in white roses where the view of the aisle was clear. From there, Clare could see the flower arch at the front of the room, the ivory runner, the candlelight reflected in hundreds of crystal drops hanging from the chandeliers above. Everything shimmered. Everything looked soft and expensive and untouched by real fear. And still she could not shake the feeling that she was standing too close to something sharp. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. Julian waited at the front with a steadier face than Clare would have expected from a man so quick to joke. Damien stood a few feet behind him with the groomsman's shoulders squared, expression unreadable, while Clare took the seat reserved for her near the aisle. She was suddenly aware of how exposed she was without him at her side, even with security positioned discreetly near the exits and around the ballroom. Twice she caught people looking back at her instead of at the bride. The awareness scraped at her. Then Sophia appeared, and the room remembered itself. For a little while, the story belonged to someone else. Clare let the vows wash over her like distant music. She watched Julian's face soften when he saw Sophia at the altar. She watched Damien remain still as stone, but there was something in the way he looked at his brother that suggested devotion he would never put into words. The room quieted around the promises being made at the front. Gold light, white roses, the faint scent of champagne and perfume. It should have felt safe. But when the ceremony ended and applause rose through the ballroom, Clare's sense of unease returned at once. The reception began immediately after. Music changed. More servers appeared. Conversation loosened into louder streams. Laughter rose. The bar opened fully. The wedding planner shifted guests toward cocktail speeches and the carefully staged flow of a perfect evening. Perfect except for the fact that a crime boss had brought the maid. Clare stood beside Damien again as guests came to congratulate the family. Most spoke to him first. Some acknowledged her with wary politeness. Others smiled too brightly, which somehow felt worse. Damien never introduced her in a way that explained anything. He simply kept her beside him as though no explanation were required. A mayoral donor with a ruby cufflink tried to ask Clare where she had met Damien. Before she could answer, Damien said, "That is not your concern." The man laughed too quickly. "Of course, just making conversation. You were making assumptions." The donor excused himself within seconds. Later, an older woman in sable touched Clare's arm and said, "You must tell me who designed your dress." Clare opened her mouth, but Damien answered first. "She does not owe anyone in this room details." The woman withdrew her hand at once. Clare waited until the woman walked away before leaning closer and whispering, "You are making me seem even more suspicious." He looked down at her, unconcerned. "Good. That was not the answer I expected. It was the answer I meant." The band replaced the quartet after dinner, and the room shifted into its next shape. Lights dimmed by a degree. The dance floor brightened. Guests became looser with champagne and bolder with curiosity. Clare thought she might finally be able to breathe. Then a middle-aged couple approached while Damien was briefly stopped by one of his attorneys near the bar. The woman was elegant, sharp-nosed, and clearly entertained by her own nerve. The man beside her wore the expression of someone who thought all people were stories waiting to be collected for amusement. The woman smiled at Clare. So she said, "How long have you and Damien been together?" Clare nearly choked on her champagne. "We're not," she began. "I mean, I work at the house, and he asked me to come, and I do not think this is what it looks like." The man chuckled. "Dear, with men like Damen Moretti, everything is exactly what it looks like. The question is, how long it takes everyone else to admit it." Clare had no idea how to respond to that. Her silence only seemed to encourage them. The woman tilted her head. "He never brings women to family events. I am not sure I count as that kind of woman," Clare said carefully. The man smiled into his drink. "That may be why he did." A warm hand came to rest at her waist. "Damien?" He stepped in close behind her, his body a line of solid heat and quiet threat. "We're done here," he said. The couple stepped back instantly. "It was harmless conversation," the woman said. No, Damien replied. It was curiosity disguised as manners. He guided Clare away without waiting for a response. She had to shorten her steps to keep pace with him. "I could have handled that." "I know. Then why did you cut in?" He turned with her into a quieter stretch near the dance floor where the music covered softer voices. "Because you should never have had to." Claire stared at him. The intensity in his face made it difficult to answer lightly. She tried anyway. You cannot remove me from every conversation tonight. His gaze held hers. Watch me. A laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Small, surprised, real. Something in Damien's expression shifted at the sound. Not softer exactly, but less armored. Then the lights over the dance floor lowered further, and an announcement drew attention to Julian and Sophia's first dance. The newly married couple moved to the center of the floor while the room applauded. Sophia looked radiant. Julian looked almost dazed with happiness. They moved together in that effortless way couples do when they are too focused on each other to care whether anyone is watching. Claire stood still beside Damien and let herself take in the beauty of it. The glow of candlelight, the polished wood beneath the dancers' feet, the band playing something slow and aching. When the song ended, applause returned. Then the floor began to fill with other couples. Damien looked at Claire. Dance with me. Her heart kicked once hard. I do not know how. You know how to follow. That is not the same thing. It is for tonight. He held out his hand. All around them, people were moving into place with practiced smiles and polished ease. Claire looked from his hand to his face, saw no trace of mockery there, and set her glass down on the nearest tray. Then she put her hand in his. The contact sent a fine current through her body. He led her onto the floor, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers. The first touch of his palm against the bare skin at the back of her dress nearly stole her balance. Do not look at them, he said quietly. Claire glanced toward the surrounding tables. They are all looking at us. Then make them work for it. That is not advice. It is in my world. The music wrapped around them, low and rich. Damien moved with complete certainty, guiding her in small, measured turns that let her find the rhythm without effort. He was not an extravagant dancer. Nothing about him begged for attention. But he carried the same command here that he did everywhere else. He expected the room to bend around him, and it did. Claire found herself relaxing by inches. The warmth of his hand at her waist steadied her. His fingers holding hers were firm without tightening. His face, so severe from a distance, looked different this close. Less carved, more human. She could see the faint shadow along his jaw where the day had started to wear at him. The tiny line between his brows that seemed permanent from years of concentration or distrust, or both. You are shaking, he murmured. So are you. The corner of his mouth moved. No, I am not. She looked at him more closely. Your hand is warmer than it was in the car. That is not shaking. It is for a man like you. That almost brought a smile out of him, almost. They turned again, slow, under the chandelier light. For a moment the room blurred at the edges. The whispers fell away. The music remained. The warm pressure of his hand remained. Claire felt the impossible sensation of being protected and exposed at the same time. Then Damien said very quietly, You were right. About what? Red was the correct choice. Claire looked down at the dress moving around her ankles. Because it shocks them. His eyes were on her, not the room. Because it suits you. Her breath caught. Before she could answer, something over his shoulder pulled her attention like a hook. A man stood alone near the far end of the bar. He was not drinking. He was not speaking to anyone. He had one hand in his pocket and the other resting against the polished edge of the bar top, his posture loose in the way dangerous men often imitated carelessness. Dark suit, no boutonniere, no expression. He did not belong to the mood of the evening at all. He was watching her, not with curiosity, with recognition. The floor beneath Claire seemed to drop. Her body went rigid in Damien's arms. He felt it immediately. His hand tightened at her waist. What is it? Claire could not look away from the man. The room around her thinned into noise and light. Her heartbeat became a hard, ugly hammer against her ribs. Claire. Her lips parted, but no sound came out at first. Damien turned his head, slightly tracking her line of sight without making a show of it. The second his gaze landed on the man, the warmth in his face vanished. Do you know him? He asked. Claire swallowed, her mouth gone dry. I have seen him before. Where? Her fingers tightened involuntarily around Damien's hand. St. Louis. He brought his attention back to her at once. Look at me. She did barely. Who is he? Claire's voice came out thin and unsteady. He is with Nolan Cross. Damien went still. It was not the stillness of surprise. It was the stillness of recalculation, the kind that happened before violence chose a shape. Are you sure? Yes. The answer was immediate, terrified. Damien looked back at the man once more. The stranger remained where he was, not moving, not approaching, content to let his presence carry the message. A witness had been found. Claire felt sick. "He knows me," she whispered. Damien's gaze hardened. "He does not get close to you." A second later, Mason appeared at Damien's shoulder as if summoned by thought alone. "Boss?" Damien did not look at him. At the bar. Dark suit, no flower, eyes on us. Mason's attention shifted with surgical precision. "I see him." "Do not approach yet." Claire barely heard them. The ballroom had become too bright, too loud. Her skin felt tight. She was no longer in Chicago. She was back in that alley's aftermath, back in the apartment where every car outside sounded like the wrong one, back inside the life she had spent 2 years trying to bury. "He should not be here," she said. Damien looked at her face once and made the decision instantly. "We are leaving." The words cut clean through the air. Claire blinked. "Damien, this is your brother's wedding. It is no longer the only thing happening in this room." He released her hand only long enough to guide her off the dance floor, one arm now firmly around her waist. Mason moved ahead to clear a path through the guests. Conversations faltered as people noticed the abrupt shift. Julian, halfway across the room with Sophia, caught Damien's eye and started forward, but one look from his brother stopped him. No explanation, no scene, only departure. That somehow made it feel even more serious. Claire walked as fast as the heels would allow. Every instinct told her not to look back, which of course made her want to. She did once and saw the man still by the bar, still watching. He did not follow. He did not need to. His message had already landed. Damien guided her through the ballroom doors, across the marble lobby, and into a quieter corridor lined with hotel staff entrances and service access points. The music faded behind them, replaced by the muted hum of ventilation and distant foot traffic. Only there did he stop. He turned her toward him and took in her face. She hated how easily he could see the fear on it. "Claire!" Her chest rose and fell too quickly. "I know that man." "I know. He was there before. Not in the alley, but after. Outside the cafe. Once outside my apartment. He works for Nolan." Damien's jaw locked hard enough to show in the line of his cheek. Mason came up beside them. "Cars are moving into position." Damien gave one short nod. Claire looked between them, panic spreading cold through her limbs. "If Nolan sent someone here, he knows where I am." Damien's eyes held hers, dark and utterly awake now. "Yes," he said, "and that means this was never just a wedding." He took her hand and led her toward the private exit, with Mason already moving ahead, while behind them, the music still played and the chandeliers still glowed, and an entire ballroom full of people kept pretending the night was only about love. By the time they reached the hotel's private exit, Claire could feel her pulse in places she had never noticed before. In her throat, in her wrists, behind her eyes. The cold hit the moment the door opened. Chicago wind swept through the narrow service lane behind the hotel, cutting straight through silk and panic. 2 black SUVs were already waiting, with engines running headlights, painting pale lines across the brick wall opposite. Mason moved first, scanning the alley, one hand near the inside of his jacket. A second security man stepped out of the lead vehicle and opened the rear door without a word. Damien turned to Claire. "Get in!" She did not argue this time. She gathered the skirt of the dress with shaking hands and slid into the back seat. Damien got in beside her a second later, bringing with him the sharp scent of winter air and dark cologne. The door shut. The locks clicked. The SUV pulled away almost immediately, tires whispering over wet pavement as they left the service lane and merged into the city traffic. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Claire stared out the window, but all she saw was reflected ballroom light and the pale oval of her own face hovering in the glass. The city beyond it moved in fragments. Brake lights, steam rising from a street grate. A man in a wool coat crossing under a traffic signal. Everything looked heartbreakingly ordinary. Inside the car, she could still feel Damien's attention on her. Not pressing, not soft, waiting. Mason sat in the front passenger seat, speaking low into an earpiece, issuing instructions with the flat precision of a man used to moving danger from one place to another. Claire caught pieces only in passing. North perimeter. Double the gate detail. No one in or out without clearance. She wrapped both arms around herself and tried to stop trembling. Damien's voice came at last, low and controlled. "Look at me." Claire turned, though every part of her wanted to curl inward and disappear. The city lights moved across his face in shifting silver and gold, as the SUV cut through downtown traffic. He had taken off none of the calm he wore at the wedding, but it had changed shape. There was nothing ceremonial in him now, nothing polished for public use. Whatever softness the ballroom had briefly allowed was gone. In its place sat something sharper. Was that man from St. Louis, he asked? Or was he someone Nolan sent after? Clare swallowed. Both. His gaze hardened. Explain. She looked down at the folds of the red dress pooled over her lap, fingers twisting the fabric without realizing it. I did not know his name, she said. But I saw him twice after the alley. Once outside the cafe, once across the street from my apartment building. He never spoke to me. He just stood there. Damien leaned back slightly, eyes still locked on her. Nolan uses watchers before he uses pressure. Mason glanced over one shoulder. That tracks. Clare lifted her head. You know how he works? Damien did not answer right away. I know enough. The silence that followed held too much. She could hear the heater humming softly through the vents. The muted crackle of Mason's earpiece. The low growl of the engine beneath them. The sounds seemed strangely intimate in the confined dark of the car. Clare looked at Damien again. You knew his name the second I said it? Yes. Why? His jaw shifted once before he answered. Because Nolan Cross has been trying to edge into territories that do not belong to him for over a year. Small moves, test moves, money through men who should not have access to that kind of money. Product through routes that were supposed to be closed. He has been looking for an opening. And now he found one, Clare whispered. Damien's eyes did not soften, but something in them turned more direct, more personal. He found you. The words landed like cold metal. Clare stared at him. I never wanted any of this. Mason snorted softly from the front. No one ever does. Damien ignored him. Tell me everything. Her throat tightened. She had known this was coming from the moment they stepped off the dance floor. Still hearing it said aloud made her feel pinned in place. I already told you what happened. No, Damien said. You told me enough to survive the night. I need the rest. Clare looked away. Outside, the city had begun thinning into quieter streets, lined with stone facades and darkened shop windows. They were heading north, back toward the estate, back toward the place that had felt almost safe until an hour ago. I cannot do this in the car, she said. Damien studied her for a beat, then gave a single nod. Fine. The rest of the drive passed in the kind of silence that felt full rather than empty. Clare was aware of every detail. The press of the leather seat under her bare arms, the ache in her feet from heels she had forgotten she was wearing. The lipstick Elena had applied so carefully now fading at the edges. The weight of her hair against her shoulders. The ridiculous, painful fact that she still looked like a woman from a fairy tale while feeling like prey. When the estate gates finally opened and the convoy rolled up the long private drive, she felt no relief, only dread with familiar walls around it. The Moretti mansion rose from the dark like a fortress built by old money and older instincts. Stone, iron, light burning in selected windows. Men stationed where there had been fewer before. The house had changed in their absence. Or maybe Clare had changed and now she could see it clearly. The SUV stopped beneath the covered entrance. Damien stepped out first and turned immediately to help her down. She took his hand without hesitation. The red dress brushed the stone step as she emerged into the cold. One of the guards opened the main door, but Damien did not lead her through the grand foyer. He guided her instead down a side corridor lined with framed oil paintings and dark walnut paneling away from the central staircase and the formal rooms. No staff, no witnesses, only Mason a few steps behind them and the muted echo of their footsteps over polished wood. They entered Damien's office through a door Clare had only ever approached from the hallway. Inside the room felt nothing like the ballroom. There was no softness here. Dark shelves lined the walls filled with leather-bound books and neat rows of files. A large desk sat beneath a bank of tall windows overlooking the rear grounds. One lamp near the fireplace cast a low, amber glow across the room, leaving the corners in shadow. The air smelled faintly of cedar whiskey and old paper. Damien closed the door behind them. The click of the lock was quiet. Clare turned toward the center of the room, suddenly too aware of the dress of the room of him. Mason remained by the door. Damien removed his suit jacket and draped it over the back of a chair with unhurried precision. Then he loosened his tie, not fully, just enough to make it clear that public appearances were over. He faced her. Sit, Claire lowered herself into one of the leather chairs in front of the desk. The seat was softer than she expected, which only made her feel more out of place. Damien stayed standing. For a few long seconds, no one spoke. He seemed content to let the silence work on her until words arrived. It did. 2 years earlier, St. Louis had been hot in the kind of way that made nights feel slower than they were. Claire had been living in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on a street where nothing glamorous ever happened, and that had been exactly what she liked about it. She had worked evening shifts at a corner cafe 3 blocks from her apartment. It was the kind of place with scratched wooden tables, a bell over the front door, and regular customers who wanted the same thing every time, and called that comfort. It was not much, she said softly, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the edge of the desk. But it was mine. Damien said nothing. She took that as permission to keep going. Nolan started coming in around the beginning of summer. Always late. Always after the dinner rush when the place was quieter. She remembered him too clearly. The first night especially. Expensive coat. Nice watch. The kind of smile that made ordinary women feel chosen before they understood the cost of being noticed by a man like that. He did not act dangerous, Claire said. He acted charming. He tipped well. Knew how to look at people like he was really listening. He remembered names. Mason made a faint sound under his breath. Disgust, probably. Claire continued. He came in 3 or 4 times a week, sometimes alone, sometimes with men who stayed near the back table and watched the room more than they touched their coffee. I thought maybe he worked in real estate, or politics, or something corporate. Men like Nolan survive because they know how to imitate legitimacy, Damien said. Claire looked up at him then. There was no judgment in his face, just focus. I did not know anything was wrong until the night I closed alone. The memory came back with brutal clarity. Rain earlier that evening, the smell of wet pavement outside the back door, a trash bag tearing on the edge of the dumpster because she had overfilled it and cursed under her breath as paper cups rolled across the alley. She had bent to pick one up when she heard voices farther back between the brick walls. Male voices. One calm, one pleading, then a sound she never forgot. A fist landing where it should not. Claire's fingers tightened around each other in her lap. I should have gone back inside, she said. I know that now. But you looked, Damien said. It was not a question. Claire nodded. At the far end of the alley, under the weak yellow spill from a security light, Nolan Cross stood over a man who was already on the ground. 2 others held him down. Nolan looked immaculate. Not angry, not rushed. He was speaking to the man almost conversationally, while blood ran from the corner of the man's mouth onto the concrete. Claire had not heard every word, only enough. Enough to know the man had taken something. Enough to know Nolan was making an example of him. Enough to know no one in that alley was supposed to walk away with memory intact. I froze, she said. I did not mean to. I just froze. The cup had slipped from her fingers and hit the ground with a plastic crack far too loud in the narrow space. One of Nolan's men turned. Claire's heart had stopped. She did not know whether they saw her face fully or only movement. She never found out because instinct finally arrived and she ran. Back through the service entrance, through the kitchen, out the front. She had not even grabbed her bag. She just ran until she reached her apartment, locked the door, and sat on the floor behind it, trying not to breathe too loudly, as if terror itself could attract attention. The next morning, detectives came to the cafe asking questions about a missing man. Claire said she knew nothing. At the time, it was not even a lie. She did not know who the man was. She did not know whether he was dead. She only knew what she had seen, and seeing it felt like stepping onto ice that could crack at any moment. Nolan found me 2 days later, she said. Damien's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Claire stared past him toward the dark windows. It was after my shift. I was walking home with groceries. He was waiting outside my building. The memory felt colder than the room. He had leaned against a black sedan like he belonged there. Dark shirt, hands in his pockets, looking elegant enough to make danger seem civilized. He smiled at me, Claire whispered. That was the worst part. He smiled and asked if I had been sleeping badly, like he knew. What did you say? Damien asked. I said I did not understand what he meant, and he let that stand. Claire let out a humorless breath. He stepped closer and told me St. Louis could be unfriendly to women who paid attention to the wrong things. Mason muttered a curse under his breath. Claire hardly heard him. He never raised his voice. He never threatened me in a way I could repeat to the police. He just made sure I knew he knew where I lived. Classic, Damien said. The single word carried enough contempt to darken the room. Clare pressed her palms together. After that, it started small. Flowers at the apartment with no card. A phone call where no one spoke. A man across the street outside the laundromat. My landlord mentioning someone had asked whether I lived alone. She looked down at the floor. I moved within a week, but the move did not help. 2 months later, a car idled outside her new apartment for 3 nights in a row. The 4th day, someone left an envelope taped to her door with nothing inside except a photograph of the cafe alley taken from above. Grainy, distant, but unmistakable. No note, no demand. Only proof that Nolan had not forgotten her. I moved again, she said. Then I changed jobs. Then I left the city. Damien came around the desk slowly and leaned against its edge closer now. Why Chicago? Clare looked up at him. Because it was big enough to disappear in and far enough away that I could tell myself starting over meant something. And the estate. She swallowed. I answered an ad through a private staffing agency. Live and work. Good pay. Strict privacy. They said the family required discretion. Mason let out a short breath that might have been bitter amusement. They were not lying. Clare's mouth almost twitched, but the feeling vanished too quickly to become a smile. I did not know it was your house until I got here. Damien folded his arms. And you stayed. Yes. Even after you learned whose house it was. Clare looked at him fully now. In a place like this, no one notices the maid unless they need something cleaned. I thought that was the safest kind of invisible. The room went quiet after that. The fire in the grate had burned low, but still gave off enough heat to soften the edges of the shadows. Somewhere in the distance, deeper in the house, a door closed. The sound barely reached them. Damien was very still. Clare knew enough about him by now to understand that stillness meant danger, not calm. Finally he said, "You should have told me." She nodded once because there was no use denying it. "I know. Not because I am offended you kept secrets in my house." His voice remained low even. That made it worse. Because if Nolan has been circling you for 2 years, then he has been circling an asset without knowing whose shadow he was standing in. The word asset stung even though she knew he did not mean it cruelly. Clare looked away. I was afraid. Of me? No. She shook her head quickly. Not of you. Of bringing trouble into this house. Of being the reason something ugly followed me here. Damien pushed away from the desk and came closer. He stopped just in front of her chair. His presence always changed the air. "You think you brought this to me," he said. "I did. Number." The word was flat and absolute. Clare looked up at him. He crouched slightly, just enough that his eyes were level with hers. It was a small movement, but it shook her more than any show of power could have. Men like Damien did not lower themselves for comfort. "Nolan chooses to hurt people," he said. "That is not your guilt to carry." Clare felt tears rise unexpectedly, and she hated them at once. "You do not understand. People around me always pay." His gaze sharpened. What people? She should not have answered. But the room had taken away the last of her defenses. The cafe owner lost his lease 6 months after I left. My upstairs neighbor's car windows were smashed after she told a man at the door she had not seen me. My landlord said I should stop attracting trouble. The tears slipped free. Everywhere I went, something followed. Damien's jaw tightened. Then very carefully he reached out and lifted her chin with 2 fingers. "Look at me." She did. His face was close enough now that she could see the dark ring around his irises, the faint tension at the corner of his mouth, the restraint he wore like armor. "There is nothing in your past," he said quietly, "that makes you too dangerous to stand beside me." Clare's breath hitched. He went on. "But there is enough in your past to make Nolan think he can use fear as leverage. That is his mistake." She should have felt reassured. Instead, the implication of his words made fresh dread spread through her. "You keep saying things like that," she whispered, "like this is already yours to handle." "It is. How can you be so sure?" Damien straightened, then gave the answer as if there had never been another possible one. "Because he put his eyes on something under my protection." The room seemed to narrow around that sentence. Clare stared at him. Mason shifted his weight by the door but stayed silent. For a moment no one moved. Then Clare found the courage to ask the question underneath all the others. "Why?" Damien did not pretend not to understand her. "Why me? Why now? Why this?" He looked at her for a long beat, and she thought perhaps he would refuse. Instead he said, "Because every person around me spends their life calculating what they can take." His voice had gone quieter than before. "You are the only person in that house who never asked me for anything." Clare's throat tightened. "That is not a reason to start a war." "No," he said. It is a reason not to hand you to someone who mistakes fear for power. Mason glanced away, perhaps out of respect for the intimacy of the moment, or perhaps because he had heard enough truth for one night. Clare wiped at her face, embarrassed. I do not know what to do. Damien's expression changed by the smallest degree, not softer, more decided. You stop running. She let out a shaky breath, just like that. Yes, you say it as if it is simple. It is not simple, he said. It is necessary. The words settled between them with the weight of stone. Damien turned to Mason. No one outside this room hears any of this tonight. Mason nodded once. Understood. Get me everything on Cross from the last 18 months. Financial movement, known associates, warehouses, clubs, shell companies. Also anything in St. Louis tied to him from 2 years ago, especially around the district where that cafe was located. On it! Mason moved toward the door, then paused. Boss. Damien looked at him. If he placed a watcher at the wedding, then he wanted to be seen. Yes, that means he is ready to make contact. Damien's face went still again. Then he is already late. Mason left. The door shut behind him, leaving Clare and Damien alone in the low amber light. The silence that followed felt different now. Less like interrogation, more like aftermath. Clare became suddenly aware that she was still wearing the red dress. Her shoulders were cold. Her feet hurt. Her body felt borrowed. Damien noticed where her hands had gone to her bare arms. Without a word, he crossed to the chair where he had left his jacket, picked it up, and came back. He draped it over her shoulders. The wool was warm from his body. Clare held it closed at her chest and looked up at him, startled by the quiet tenderness of the gesture. You should get out of that dress, he said. The sentence should have sounded dangerous in a room like this. It did not. It sounded practical, almost weary. I can call Helen. Clare shook her head. I can manage. He nodded. Still neither of them moved. The fire shifted softly behind him. Then his phone buzzed on the desk. The sound cut through the room like a blade. Damien picked it up, checked the screen, and answered without greeting. Clare watched his face as he listened. Whatever he heard erased the last trace of stillness. When he said, a pause, his expression hardened. No, do not respond yet. Trace the number, confirm the route, and call me back in 5. He ended the call and set the phone down with controlled precision. Clare stood too fast, his jacket slipping slightly from one shoulder. What happened? Damien looked at her. Cross sent a message. Her blood went cold. What kind of message? He wants a meeting. The room seemed to tilt. With you. Damien held her gaze. Yes. Clare clutched the front of his jacket tighter around herself. Then he knows. He knows enough. Fear moved through her so fast it left her dizzy. I am sorry. Damien's face changed instantly, something dark flashing there. Number. She blinked. You do not apologize for surviving him. The force in his voice stunned her into silence. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of him, even through the jacket draped around her shoulders. You did everything alone for 2 years, he said. You do not say sorry to me now because he finally showed his hand. Clare stared up at him, tears threatening again for reasons she could not name. His gaze dropped briefly to the jacket around her, then returned to her face. Listen carefully, he said. She did. You are not staff anymore where this is concerned. You are not invisible. You do not move alone in this house. You do not leave these grounds. And if anyone asks questions, the answer is no. Her pulse stumbled. You are serious. His expression did not change. I have never been less anything. Clare searched his face as if she might still find doubt there. She found none. Instead, she found something more dangerous. Commitment. Not romantic, not yet, but personal enough to shake her. What am I supposed to do while you handle this? Damien's answer came without hesitation. Stay alive. He said it so calmly that the room itself seemed to tighten around the words. Clare looked at him, at the man who had walked into a kitchen and changed everything with one gesture, at the man who now stood close enough to catch her if fear made her knees give out, and for the first time since St. Louis, she felt something she barely recognized. Not safety exactly, something even rarer. The possibility of it. Damien picked up his phone again, eyes already back on the work ahead, but when he passed her on his way around the desk, his fingers brushed lightly against her wrist. A small touch. Grounding. Real. And in that dark office, wrapped in the warmth of his jacket, while the threat she had run from finally caught up to her, Clare understood one thing with painful clarity. The secret she had spent 2 years burying was no longer hers alone. By morning, the estate no longer felt like a mansion. It felt like a perimeter. Clare noticed it before she even opened her eyes fully. Footsteps outside her door at an hour when the staff corridors were usually quiet. Voices kept low but moving quickly, the muffled buzz of radios, a door opening somewhere farther down the hall then shutting with purpose. Even the air seemed different, tighter somehow, as if the house itself had drawn in a breath and decided not to let it out. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then memory returned all at once. The ballroom, the man at the bar, Damien's office. Nolan Cross wants a meeting. Claire sat up too fast and had to steady herself with one hand against the mattress. She was no longer in her small room near the staff wing. Sometime after she had finally changed out of the red dress, and Helen had quietly brought her tea and a soft gray sleep shirt without asking a single question, she had been moved to one of the guest rooms closer to the center of the house, closer to Damien. The room was larger than anything Claire would have chosen for herself. Pale walls, a carved headboard, thick curtains half drawn against the watery morning light, fresh flowers on a side table, the kind of careful luxury that never called attention to itself because it assumed attention was already guaranteed. And outside the door unmistakably stood a guard. Claire swung her feet to the floor and crossed to the window. The grounds below were moving with quiet precision. 2 patrol vehicles that had not been there yesterday now sat along the outer drive. Men in dark coats were walking the east hedge line. Near the gatehouse she counted at least 4 extra figures she did not recognize. Nolan had not even stepped onto the property, and already the entire rhythm of the house had bent around him. A knock sounded. Claire turned. Helen came the voice through the door. "May I come in?" "Yes." The head housekeeper entered carrying a tray with coffee fruit and toast arranged so neatly it almost looked unreal. Helen had served the Moretti household for years, and her face usually carried the composed neutrality of a woman who had seen too much to be rattled by anything. This morning, though, there was something more careful in her expression. "Good morning," she said gently. Claire glanced toward the hallway behind her. "There is a guard outside my room." Helen set the tray down. "Yes, you say that like it is normal. In this house, normal changes quickly." Claire let out a small breath and looked back toward the window. "Am I in trouble?" Helen's eyes softened just a little. "No, dear. Trouble is outside the room. That is the point." Claire turned to face her fully. "What exactly am I supposed to do now?" Helen hesitated from the briefest moment. "What Mr. Moretti says." That answer did not surprise Claire. It still made something in her resist. Before she could say more, the guard outside shifted and another voice followed. "Miss Bennett," the guard said through the door. "Mr. Moretti would like to see you in his office." Of course he would. Helen touched Claire's sleeve, once light and almost maternal. "Eat something first." "I cannot." "You should." Claire looked at the untouched tray, the polished silver, the neat triangles of toast, and suddenly wanted nothing more than a chipped mug in the old kitchen and 5 quiet minutes where no one knew her name. "I will later." Helen studied her, then nodded and stepped aside. Claire changed into the simplest thing she could find in the wardrobe Helen had apparently arranged for her: overnight dark slacks, a cream-knit sweater, flat shoes. Something that felt like herself again, or close enough to it. She tied her hair back loosely, then stopped halfway and let it fall instead. The knot now made her think of hiding, and she was not sure that was allowed anymore. When she opened the door, the guard standing there straightened at once. He was younger than the others she had seen downstairs, broad-shouldered, serious, clearly briefed. "This way, ma'am." Claire almost flinched at the word. No one in this house had ever called her that. They walked through the corridor together. The mansion's usual morning sounds were still present if she listened for them closely. Dishes somewhere below. A vacuum in one distant room. Staff voices near the kitchen. But layered over all of it was the sharper current of security. Men she had never seen before stood near the cross hall and the rear staircase. A radio murmured from behind a half-closed door. At the landing above the main foyer, 2 guards watched the grounds through the front windows. Everyone knew something had shifted. Everyone knew it was because of her. The realization sat heavy in Claire's chest. When they reached Damien's office, the guard opened the door and stepped back. Damien stood near the windows with one hand in his pocket. Dark shirt sleeves rolled to his forearms. No jacket, no tie. Morning light cut across his face in pale winter stripes. Mason sat on the edge of the desk phone in one hand, a legal pad in the other. The atmosphere in the room was all tension and restraint. They both looked up when Claire entered. Damien's expression changed first, though only slightly. The hard calculation in it eased by a fraction when he saw she was steady on her feet. "Sit," he said. Clare did. Mason gave her a brief nod. "Morning." She returned it. "Morning." Damien came away from the window and braced one hand on the desk, leaning slightly forward. "We traced the message," he said. "Nolan wants to meet tonight." Claire's stomach dropped again, even though she had known this was coming. "Where?" "A closed club in River North." Mason glanced at his notes. "He chose it because it reads like neutral ground. It is not." Clare looked from one man to the other. "And you are going?" It was not a question. "Yes," Damien said. The answer came so simply that it frightened her more than if he had tried to reassure her. She stared at him. "No." Mason looked up. Damien did not move. Clare heard the word she had just said and almost regretted it, but fear kept her upright. "You cannot just walk into wherever he tells you to go," she said. "That is exactly what he wants." Damien's gaze stayed fixed on hers. "He wants to test whether I will answer him. That part is already over. This is because of me." "No," he said, sharper now. "It is because he thinks he can put pressure on something under my protection and make me bend." Clare swallowed. "You keep saying that, because you keep trying to make this smaller than it is." His voice was low, not raised, but the force in it filled the room. Mason set the legal pad down and folded his arms. Nolan did not send a watcher to a wedding just to be theatrical. He wanted 3 things: confirmation, panic, and response. He got the first 2. Tonight, he wants the 3rd in person. Clare looked at Mason. "And you think meeting him is the smart move?" "I think refusing him would read like weakness." Mason shrugged once. "In our world, that becomes expensive." "Our world," Clare lowered her gaze to her hands. That world had never been hers. Yet somehow she had become the reason it was turning. Damien came around the desk and stopped in front of her chair. Not close enough to crowd her. Close enough that she could not hide from the steadiness in him. "Tell me everything else you remember," he said. "No detail is too small." She nodded slowly and searched backward through years of fear. She told them about the make of the black sedan Nolan leaned on outside her apartment, about the silver signet ring he used to wear on his right hand, about a voice she had once heard over his shoulder at the cafe mentioning a shipment by the river, about a warehouse district she had passed through on a bus route after moving to her second apartment where she later saw one of Nolan's men outside a fenced loading gate, about the way Nolan never repeated a threat. He implied once, then let the silence do the rest. Mason wrote quickly. Damien listened the way he did everything else with full and terrifying attention. At one point, Clare hesitated over a memory that felt too small to matter. "There was a song," she said. Mason's pen paused. "A song." "Yes. The night I saw him in the alley, I remember music coming from somewhere nearby, not from the street, from inside a building." She frowned. "It was old. Jazz, maybe. Brass. I do not know why I remember that." Damien and Mason exchanged a look that was too quick for anyone outside their world to read. Damien asked what building was near the alley. The cafe backed onto a service road. There was a club on the corner 1 block over. It stayed open late. Mason tapped the pen once against the page. "That gives us overlap with one of the addresses we already flagged from St. Louis." Clare looked at him. "You found that already?" "We started the moment you left the office last night," Damien said. Something about the sentence pressed strangely against her ribs, not just because of the speed, because of what it meant. He had taken her fear and turned it into action before she had even slept. Clare looked up at him. "Why are you doing all this for me?" Mason's eyes shifted away at once, as though even he knew better than to stay directly inside that question. Damien did not answer immediately. Instead, he crouched in front of her chair so that once again their eyes were level. The move was devastating in its quietness. "Because Nolan did not pick some random witness out of a city and leave her in the dark," he said. "He put his hand on someone inside my house." Clare held his gaze, breath uneven. "That matters to you because it is your house," she said softly. His expression did not change. "It matters because it is you." The room went still. Mason let out the smallest possible exhale and stood collecting the legal pad. "I should check the perimeter team," he said to no one in particular, and left the office with a tact that only made the silence he left behind feel larger. Clare stared at Damien after the door shut. For a moment she was not sure she had heard him correctly, or maybe she had heard him too correctly. He stood again and crossed toward the desk, putting space back into the room as if he too understood the danger of having said something true too plainly. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "That is exactly what I was afraid of." Damien stopped with one hand resting on the edge of the desk. What is? That I would become personal. He looked at her over his shoulder. You already are. The words shook something loose inside her. Claire stood abruptly and moved away from the chair because sitting felt impossible now. She crossed toward the fireplace, then stopped there with her back half turned to him, trying to keep herself together. You should not let someone like me become personal. Damien's reply came from behind her, steady and immediate. Someone like you. Claire closed her eyes. Someone with this kind of mess attached. She heard his footsteps on the rug before she felt him beside her. When she turned, he was close enough that she had to tip her chin slightly to hold his gaze. There is a difference, he said, between a mess and a wound. Claire's throat tightened. He went on, voice lower now. You did not create this. He did. She looked down, but Damien would not let the moment slip away. One hand came up under her chin, guiding her face back toward his. No more apologizing for surviving him. Her pulse jumped. There was no romance in the line, not in the ordinary sense. It was fiercer than that. More protective, more dangerous. Claire asked the only thing she could. What if he does not stop? Damien's expression darkened. Then I stop him. The certainty in him should not have been comforting. It was, anyway. He dropped his hand and stepped back, before the closeness could become something neither of them was prepared to name. From now on, he said, shifting back into command with visible effort, you do not leave this section of the house without a guard. Not the kitchen, not the rear courtyard, not the staff wing. If you need anything, ask Helen or ask me. Ask you. His mouth flattened slightly, yes. Claire almost laughed, but it came out as a shaky breath. That sounds impractical. I am not interested in practical. He returned to the desk and picked up his phone just as it buzzed. He answered with one word. Report. Claire watched his face change as he listened. His jaw hardened. A beat later, he said, how bad? Another pause. Then is he alive? Claire's stomach twisted. Damien ended the call and looked at her. One of my men was hit outside a storage site in Cicero this morning. Hit! Not killed then. But close enough that the word sat like metal in the air. Mason re-entered at once as if summoned by the change in tone alone. What happened? Bruno took a bullet grazing the shoulder when he went to inspect Site 4. 2 men in an unmarked sedan. Fast approach, no attempt to finish. They wanted a message delivered. Mason's expression turned flat and dangerous. And the message? Damien looked at Claire before he answered. He knows we are moving, Mason swore under his breath. That means one of the schedules leaked. The room sharpened instantly around that fact. Claire felt the shift before either man spoke it aloud. There is someone inside, she said. Mason nodded once. Maybe not in the house, maybe in the network, but yes, someone is feeding Nolan pieces. Damien's eyes had gone cold in that particular way Claire was beginning to understand. This was not anger in the loud sense. It was the kind that organized itself. How many knew Bruno was heading to Site 4, he asked. 6, Mason said. 7 if you count dispatch. Cut the list to 3 until I say otherwise. Move all non-essential schedules off digital. Rotate gate teams every 4 hours instead of 8. Mason was already typing it into his phone. Done. Claire stood very still by the fireplace. A traitor. Not just outside pressure, not just a rival man with old threats. Something inside Damien's world had cracked open too. She hated the guilt that followed at once. This would not be happening if not for me. Both men looked at her. Mason perhaps wisely said nothing. Damien crossed the room in 3 strides. No, he said. This is happening because Nolan sees opportunity and because one of my own people is stupid enough to mistake access for safety. But the timing is his choice, not your fault. Claire looked at him helplessly. You make it sound simple. His face tightened. I make it sound accurate. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Damien exhaled, the tension shifting in his shoulders, just enough to reveal the strain beneath it. Go upstairs for a while, he said more quietly. Helen will bring lunch. Claire stared at him. You want me to sit in a room while you prepare for a war? Yes, I do not like that answer. I did not ask whether you liked it. Something in her snapped at that. Fear, exhaustion, and the humiliating helplessness of the past 24 hours all rose at once. Well, maybe I am tired of being moved around like a problem you have to manage. The words landed hard in the office. Mason went perfectly still. Damien did too, but for a different reason. Surprise flashed once through the control in his face, then vanished. Claire heard herself and could not stop. For 2 years, all I have done is run or hide or keep quiet so men with power could decide what my life was worth. First Nolan, now you. I know you are trying to protect me, but I am still the one being shut behind a door while everyone else gets to choose what happens." The silence that followed was so complete Claire could hear the faint ticking of the brass clock on the bookshelf. Mason, recognizing survival when he saw it, backed toward the door. "I will check the east gate." No one stopped him. When the office door shut again, Damien remained exactly where he was, eyes on Claire. Then, to her surprise, his voice came back low rather than sharp. "You are not a problem." Claire's breathing was still too fast. "That is not what this feels like." He nodded once, as if granting the truth of her feeling without surrendering the argument. "It feels like confinement because danger has already crossed the threshold." "I understand that." He took a step closer. "But do not mistake the way I am handling this for how I see you." Claire's hands had curled into fists at her sides. "Then tell me how you see me." The question hung between them, reckless and too honest. Damien did not answer right away. That pause hurt more than a quick dismissal would have. When he finally spoke, the words came from somewhere deeper than command. "I see someone who kept herself alive for 2 years with no protection, no backup, and no reason to trust men who promise safety." Claire felt the fight go out of her in one painful rush. He came closer. "I see someone who walked into a room full of wolves and still kept her head up." Another step. "And I see the one person in this house whose fear makes me angry at the world instead of at her." Claire looked at him, stunned by the rawness of that. His voice dropped lower. "Do you understand what that means?" She shook her head once. Damien's gaze held hers. "It means this stopped being only about duty the second I realized the thought of him reaching you made me want to tear half the city apart." The room tilted. Claire could not breathe properly. He seemed to realize in the same instant how much he had revealed. The control came back over his features like a door closing, but not fast enough to hide what had already escaped. Claire whispered Damien. His eyes flicked to her mouth for one dangerous second and then back to her face. "This is why I need you alive," he said. "Not out there, not proving anything. Alive." Her chest ached. "I do not know how to do this." "Then let me do it for now." The words were almost gentle. Almost. Claire looked down at the floor, then up again. "If something happens to you tonight because of me, I will never forgive myself." Damien's expression turned into something that was not quite a smile and not quite sadness either. "People have been trying to destroy me for years," he said. "I am still here." "That is not an answer." "It is the only one you are getting this afternoon." A knock cut through the room before she could say more. Mason stepped back inside all business again. "Boss, we are ready when you are." Damien's posture changed at once. The man standing in front of Claire became the man the city feared. He reached for the jacket hanging over the back of the chair, shrugged into it, then turned to her once more. "You stay here until I send for you." Claire took one step toward him without thinking. "Be careful." The words were small, but they changed his face. For one brief, unguarded second, the hardness left his eyes. Then he closed the distance, took her hand, and lifted it to his mouth. The kiss he pressed to her knuckles was not playful, not courtly, not performed. It was a vow disguised as restraint. When he let her hand go, the warmth remained. "I do not take stupid risks," he said quietly. Then he turned and left with Mason at his shoulder. The office door closed. Claire stood alone in the room, fingers still tingling from where his mouth had been heart-beating far too hard for a woman who was supposed to stay calm and hidden. Outside the windows, the winter sky over the estate had gone the color of steel, and somewhere in the city, Nolan Cross was waiting for Damen Moretti to arrive and decide exactly how much blood could be hidden beneath a conversation. Room fingers still tingling from where his mouth had been heart-beating far too hard for a woman who was supposed to stay calm and hidden. Outside the windows, the winter sky over the estate had gone the color of steel, and somewhere in the city, Nolan Cross was waiting for Damen Moretti to arrive and decide exactly how much blood could be hidden beneath the conversation. Claire did not argue when Damien left the office. She wanted to. Every part of her that had spent 2 years surviving on instinct wanted to stand in front of the door, force him to stay, force the whole house to stay frozen until danger passed by on its own. But she knew better now. Men like Nolan Cross did not drift away when ignored. They leaned harder. They pressed until something broke. And Damen Moretti was not built to let anything break in his house if he could get to it first. So she stood in the middle of his office after he walked out, surrounded by books and firelight and the last heat of his presence, and listened to the estate move around her like a loaded machine preparing to fire. Mason stayed with her for another few minutes while Damien gathered his people downstairs. He stood near the desk, checking messages, answering low calls, saying very little unless it mattered. Claire watched him without pretending she was not watching. "You trust him," she said quietly. Mason glanced up from his phone. "With my life." "That sounds expensive." "It is." He slipped the phone back into his pocket and leaned one shoulder against the wall. "You should know something. He is not reckless." Claire folded her arms around herself. "That is not what this looks like from where I'm standing." Mason's expression stayed level. "Because you are standing too close to the part that scares him." The words landed hard enough to take her breath for a second. "He does not scare easily," she said. "No." Mason looked toward the closed door as if Damien's absence itself had weight. "That is how I know this matters." Before Claire could answer, Ethan appeared in the doorway holding a tablet. "We traced one of the secondary numbers," he said. "Cross is using the old Velvet Room on Orleans as the meeting point." Private entrance in the back front shuttered staff cleared out at midnight. Mason nodded once. "How many heat signatures last sweep?" "Inside at least 8, maybe 10. Hard to tell with the basement interference." Mason looked at Claire. "That is where he is going." Her chest tightened. She hated that she already knew the answer to the next question before she asked it. "When?" "Now." The word left the room and settled inside her like ice. She did not remember deciding to move, only that she was suddenly crossing the office toward the door. Mason stepped in front of her, not aggressively, just enough to make it clear he had no intention of letting her pass. "Number?" Claire stared at him. "Move. I cannot do that. I am not asking." His expression did not change. "Then you should save your breath." Anger rose with the fear so quickly it shocked her. "He is walking into a trap because of me. He is walking into a trap because Cross forced the timing," Mason said. "The reason may be you. The choice is still his." Claire looked past him toward the hall, toward the rest of the house, toward the part of the world where Damien was already in motion. Then before she could stop herself, she said the only thing that felt true enough to matter. "If he does not come back, I will never be able to live with that." Mason's face changed, not much but enough. "He knows that," he said, "which is exactly why he will." She wanted to believe him. She almost did. But survival had taught her something long ago. Certainty was usually just fear in better clothes. The next hour moved strangely. Time in the Moretti house had always felt measured, ordered. This was different. Every minute stretched and snapped at the same time. Ethan worked from a temporary station in the sitting room outside Damien's office screens, glowing with camera feeds and maps. Men went in and out quietly. Names were exchanged. Routes adjusted. 2 extra vehicles rolled into position outside the front drive. Someone brought coffee. None of them drank. Claire sat in the armchair by the office window and watched the grounds without seeing them. Once Ethan handed her a glass of water and she realized she had been gripping the armrest so hard her fingers hurt. "You should eat something," he said. She gave him a look almost identical to the one she had given Damien earlier. To his credit, he almost smiled. "I know," he said. "Bad timing." She set the untouched water on the side table and looked back at the windows. Rain had started. Not hard. Just a thin gray mist over the stone paths and bare trees at the edge of the property. It blurred the world enough to make everything beyond the glass seem farther away than it was. A little after noon, Mason came back. He entered fast, though not in panic. Fast in the way men moved when information had finally become usable. Ethan looked up at once. "What?" Mason's eyes went first to Claire, then to Ethan. Cross shifted locations. Ethan straightened. "To where?" "Warehouse district near the Calumet. Old freight building off the river. He wants a cleaner exit route if this goes bad." Claire stood so abruptly the chair legs scraped the floor. Mason's gaze cut to her. "Sit. Number." He walked closer. "Claire." "I am going with you." The room went still. Even Ethan stopped typing. Mason stared at her for a long beat, perhaps waiting for the words to sound absurd once they had fully landed. They did not. "You are not." "Yes, I am." His expression hardened. "This is not a negotiation." "I know what Nolan wants," she said. "I know how he talks when he thinks he has already won. I know what frightens him. I know what makes him careless. You said yourself he wants this to be about leverage. Then let him look at the leverage and see it is not bending." Mason's jaw shifted. For the first time, Ethan looked at her not as a protected person in the room, but as a variable he had not fully calculated. "Boss will say no," Mason said. Claire held his gaze. "Then let him say it to my face." He looked like he wanted to refuse on principle alone. Instead, he pulled out his phone, sent a message, waited, then checked the response almost immediately. His eyes lifted back to hers. He says if you are getting in a car, it is his. Relief and dread hit her at the same time. The convoy left 20 minutes later. 3 black SUVs moved through the rain-slick streets of the South Side with the smooth purpose of something built for ugly work. Claire sat in the back beside Damian Mason, in the front passenger seat, 2 more cars following close behind. No one had spoken for the first 10 minutes. The city outside looked colder here, less polished. Elevated tracks, shuttered loading docks, rusted fencing, old brick buildings with broken windows staring blankly over wet pavement. The closer they came to the river, the more the streets emptied of ordinary life. Damian's hand rested on the seat between them, open, but not reaching. Claire looked at it once, then at him. He was all focus now. Dark coat back on shirt immaculate, despite the long night expression carved into something that left no room for doubt. "You should not have let me come," she said. His gaze stayed on the windshield. "You were coming either way. That is not an answer. It is the one that matters." A bitter little laugh escaped her. "You do that a lot. You answer the thing underneath the thing I ask." He turned then. Rain streaked the window behind him, blurring the hard line of warehouses sliding past. "You want the truth." His voice was low. "The truth is that if he asked for you and I kept you hidden, he would think you were still afraid enough to run." Claire held his gaze. "And if I come?" Then he sees that someone reached you first. The car seemed suddenly too small for the force of what he had just said. Mason's voice cut through from the front. "We are 2 minutes out." Damian nodded once and looked back at Claire. The hand between them finally moved. He took hers. Warm, firm, steady. "You stay behind me unless I tell you otherwise." She swallowed. "You keep saying that like you can order the whole world into shape." His thumb brushed once over her knuckles, only the parts that listen. The warehouse appeared ahead in layers. A long, low building of corrugated steel and stained brick crouched beside the dark ribbon of the river. Floodlights mounted high on rusted poles cast yellow cones across the loading yard. Chain-link fencing rattled in the wind. Rain gleamed over puddles and broken concrete. Beyond the dock, the water moved black and silent under a sky the color of old metal. The lead SUV rolled to a stop. Claire's pulse became a violent thing inside her chest. Damian released her hand first and stepped out into the cold rain. She followed a second later, the damp air knifing through her coat. Mason was already outside, scanning the roofline, the loading bays, the shadowed spaces between vehicles abandoned along the fence. At the far end of the yard, a side door opened. Nolan Cross stepped out as if he were arriving for dinner rather than walking into the center of a private war. He wore a dark overcoat, black gloves, and the same polished ease Claire remembered from St. Louis. Time had not softened him. If anything, it had refined him. He looked expensive and calm and utterly certain of his own ability to poison whatever room he entered. 2 men fell in behind him. More shadows moved inside the warehouse. Nolan's eyes found Claire immediately. A smile touched his mouth. "There you are." Damian shifted 1 step in front of her. "Careful," he said. Nolan laughed softly, still touchy. "I was beginning to think she might not be real." Claire felt Damian's stillness sharpen beside her. Nolan let his gaze linger over her face. "You look different from St. Louis." "I am." The words left her before fear could stop them. Nolan's smile widened slightly. "Good. Fear should change a person." Damian took another step forward. "You asked for a meeting. You have it. Start talking." Rain tapped against the metal siding behind Nolan. Somewhere above them, a loose length of chain knocked rhythmically against a pole in the wind. Nolan spread his hands. Simple. She saw something she should not have seen. "I have spent 2 years cleaning up the edges of that mistake. Then you parade her into a ballroom like a declaration," it was Damian said. The answer made Nolan's expression flicker. "There it is," he murmured. "I was wondering when I would hear the real version of you." Damian did not react. Nolan nodded toward Claire. "She is a problem for both of us. For me, because she breathes. For you, because she makes men like me look too closely at what you protect." "She is only a problem for you," Damian said, "because you still think people belong to whoever scares them most." Nolan's eyes went cold. He reached into his coat pocket slowly enough that all 3 of Damian's men shifted at once, hands near weapons. Nolan stopped when he saw it, amused, and pulled out only a phone. He pressed the screen. An audio clip crackled through the wet air. Claire's own voice came through the small speaker, younger, shaking breathless with panic. "He is outside again. I saw him by the laundromat. I do not know what to do. If anything happens to me." Nolan cut the recording there and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Claire felt the blood drain from her face. "I kept that," Nolan said lightly. "Thought it might be useful one day. You always did sound prettiest when you were terrified." Damien's voice dropped so low it seemed to come from somewhere deeper than anger. "If you say another word to her like that, I will put you in the river." For the first time since stepping into the yard, Nolan looked at Damien with something other than amusement. Then his attention shifted back to Claire. "You should have left it alone," he said. "You should have kept running." Claire stepped slightly out from behind Damien before she could lose the nerve to do it. "I did run," she said, "for 2 years. The rain caught in her hair and chilled the side of her face. She barely felt it." Nolan watched her with quiet interest. "And now," Claire looked at him, really looked. At the man who had turned entire years of her life into a series of closed curtains and false names and fear sharp enough to taste. "Now I am tired." Something changed in Damien beside her. Not alarm, recognition. Nolan tilted his head. "That is brave." "No," Claire said. "It is honest." For one suspended second, no one moved. Then Damien reached into his coat and drew out his own phone. Nolan's gaze sharpened. "What is that?" "Your mistake." Damien turned the screen outward and tapped it once. The video began. The alley behind the cafe. Grainy security footage from a camera mounted above the service exit on the building across the lane. Not perfect, but clear enough. Nolan standing over the man on the ground. Nolan's men holding him. Nolan leaning down to say something before the final blow landed. Nolan's face emptied. "How?" Damien's eyes never left his. "You were sloppier than you think. A backup server. Property archive. Dead companies still leave footprints if you know where to dig." Mason's voice came from Claire's left flat and satisfied. "You should have bought the whole block." For the first time, Nolan looked uncertain. It was not a dramatic unraveling. Men like him never gave that away. It showed only in the fractionally slower blink the stillness that was no longer chosen. Damien stepped forward into the rain. "You wanted leverage. Here is mine." Nolan's jaw tightened. "You send that anywhere and you drag yourself into the mud with me." Damien's mouth curved without warmth. "You still think I care about mud?" The floodlight above them hummed. Rain ran down Nolan's coat collar and into the crease beside his mouth. Damien continued, voice calm enough to be terrifying. "You leave Illinois. You leave her name out of your mouth. You leave every set of eyes you have near my property, my family, and anyone who works for me. You disappear so thoroughly I never hear your name again, except from accountants burying your losses. And if I do not," Damien held up the phone between them, "then this video goes to the Bureau, the state attorney, and every rival who has been waiting for an excuse to pull at your empire until it comes apart in their hands." Nolan looked at Claire then, and for one sickening instant she thought he might lunge, might reach for the violence he trusted most. Instead he smiled. It was the worst smile yet. Small, bitter, human in the ugliest way. All this for her. Damien did not look back at Claire when he answered. "Yes." The word entered the rain and stayed there. Nolan exhaled through his nose gaze, shifting between them once more as if measuring something he had not expected to find. At last he gave one short nod. "You win this one." There was no nobility in it, no surrender, only acknowledgement. He stepped back. One day he said softly, "You may decide she was too expensive." Damien's face did not change. "Go." Nolan held Claire's gaze one final time. Whatever he meant to leave their fear memory ownership did not land the way he intended. Then he turned and walked back toward the warehouse, his men falling in behind him. A side door slammed. Headlights flared somewhere beyond the building a few seconds later. Tires hissed over wet pavement. Then they were gone. No gunfire, no blood, only the strange roaring silence that follows the moment violence chooses not to happen. Claire realized she was shaking only when Damien turned toward her fully. He was in front of her before she could speak. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. The yard still smelled like rain and rust and cold river water. Mason spoke into his radio, ordering tails, confirming routes moving the rest of the operation outward into the city. Ethan's voice crackled back through an earpiece. Men began returning to vehicles. Claire could barely hear any of it. All she could see was Damien standing in the raincoat, dark with water at the shoulders. Eyes fixed on her with a kind of intensity that made the whole world narrow down to one question. "Are you still here?" She answered it by stepping closer. The movement was small. Enough. Damien exhaled, and in that breath she heard how close the line had been. Back at the estate, everything felt quieter. Not peaceful yet. just quieter, as if the house itself had stopped bracing for impact and had not decided what to do with the relief. Clare stood in the sitting room outside Damien's suite while one of the maids brought dry towels and vanished again. Her hair was damp. Her hands were still cold. The adrenaline had drained out of her too fast, leaving her shaky and hollowed. Damien came in a few minutes later after speaking with Mason in the hall. They were alone when the door shut. The fire on the far wall had already been lit. Lamplight turned the room amber and gold. Outside the tall windows, rain still moved over the glass in silver lines. Clare looked at him. "You should not have done that." His brows lifted faintly. "Done what?" "Any of it." He took off his coat and laid it over the arm of the sofa. "Too late. That is not funny. I was not joking." She stared at him, frustration and gratitude and something far more dangerous colliding in her chest. "You could have lost everything." Damien walked closer, the fatigue of the last 24 hours finally visible around his eyes without making him seem any less formidable. Number. I did not risk everything he said. I chose what mattered." The room went very still. Clare felt her pulse in her throat again. "And what is that?" she asked, though she already knew. He stopped in front of her. "You." It was such a simple word. No flourish, no poetry, just truth. Clare's eyes filled before she could stop them. She hated that she cried so easily around him now, but she could not seem to help it. He had torn too many old things open and replaced them with something she did not yet know how to carry. He lifted one hand and brushed a thumb under her eye. "The night I walked into that kitchen," he said quietly, "I thought I needed a date." A broken laugh slipped out of her. His mouth moved at the corner, almost a smile. "Then you looked at me like I was a man and not a throne, and suddenly every other choice in the room looked useless." Clare let out a shaky breath. "You do realize," she whispered, "that most women would hear that as a terrible compliment." "Most women are not you." The answer warmed and wrecked her at once. She placed both hands against his shirt palms flat over the steady strength of him and looked up. "You were the first person," she said slowly, "who made me feel safe without making me feel small." Something in his face changed then. Not the careful control she had been learning all story. Something deeper, less guarded, almost undone. He rested his forehead lightly against hers. "Then stay," he murmured. Clare closed her eyes. "As what?" His answer came against the quiet space between them. "As mine." A tear slipped free despite her best effort. She laughed softly through it and opened her eyes. "I think she said I was yours the moment you pointed at me in that kitchen." His breath caught. Then he kissed her. Not like a man claiming a prize. Not like a boss taking what the room had always denied him. He kissed her like a rival. Like relief. Like he had been holding some part of himself still for so long that touching her finally let it move. Clare rose into it without fear. When they parted, the fire crackled softly behind them, and the house beyond the door remained quiet for once. No alarms, no footsteps, no calls cutting through the moment. Damien rested his hand against the side of her neck thumb warm below her ear. "What happens now?" she asked. His gaze searched hers as if the answer mattered enough to be chosen carefully. "Now," he said, "you stop running." Clare smiled through the last of her tears. "With you, with me." And in the low gold light of the room, while rain softened the dark beyond the windows, and the war finally loosened its grip on the house, Clare Bennett understood that she was no longer the invisible woman from the service hall, or the frightened witness from St. Louis. She was the woman Damen Moretti chose in front of the whole world. Not for a wedding, not for appearances, for everything.